All right, everybody. We're just about a minute past the hour. I want to thank everybody for joining today's International Affairs Lunch and Learn series. Just a note up front, we're recording the presentation portion of this seminar, but I'll be shutting off the recording, video recording when we get into Q&A and discussion. But my name is Matt Louisa. I'm the program officer for the African Elephant Conservation Fund. Very excited today to introduce our distinguished guest, Dr. Pete Coppolillo, the Executive Director of Working Dogs for Conservation. They've been a previous grantee of International Affairs through our Division of International Conservation, funded previously through our Africa Regional Program, as well as our Combating Wildlife Trafficking Strategy and Partnerships branch, and more recently have been providing critical support to active African Elephant Conservation Fund grantees in Southern Africa, in Zambia, Conservation South, Luangwa. But Pete's going to be talking today about applications and deployment of conservation dogs globally. I know there's a lot of interest in this topic from a domestic and international perspective, spanning law enforcement applications, ecological restoration, biosecurity monitoring, and the like. So Pete's going to be giving us a rundown of what Working Dogs for Conservation is doing, as well as share some stories, and we'll get to see some videos of the dogs in action as well, which is always great. A little bit of housekeeping. So you're all in charge of your microphones and video cameras, so kindly request that you keep your mics muted unless you're speaking. You're welcome to turn your video on if you like, but you don't have to. I'm also going to be monitoring the chat, so if folks want to drop questions as we move along in the chat box, you're welcome to. I'll keep an eye on that, but also you can equally save your questions for after the presentation for the discussion section. But on that, want to give Pete plenty of time to talk, so I'll hand it off to Pete. Take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you all for tuning in, showing up, whatever we call it. I'm gonna kind of go fast so that I can try and leave time at the end for questions if you have them, and also feedback and ideas and stuff like that, because some of our best projects and ideas have, they come from others, doing the work and confronting different problems out in the world. So I'm always interested to hear about that stuff, and what the next important thing to do is. So those are, I'm going to use examples from both domestic and international things, but it's kind of a fast overview. And a lot of sort of greatest hits of dog work, just to give you an illustrative set of things that we're up to, and some of our partners do, and how it all works. So that's WD4C in one slide. We've been around for a couple decades now, and have worked in a lot of different places. And but the most important piece of that slide in the middle here is that we've kind of evolved how we work. We used to just implement projects and do all the field work ourselves. And now we've kind of just in the last few years added this sort of consulting dimension where we support other programs. And we also are creating new programs, like Matt mentioned with Conservation South Luangwa. So we train the dogs and the handlers and then send them off. And then we do that in sort of four big categories that I'll touch on as we go through. And the backstory, the lead into all of this is a story that you guys all know quite well. So I don't need to labor too much on it. It's that a lot of species are really difficult to work on. I personally know folks who worked on all of these species without ever having seeing them in the field. And so if folks come to us and say, how do we protect them? Often we don't even know where they are, much less what's eating them and what they eat and diseases and all of that stuff. So, our response is often to intensify. I usually use this example. This is one from my past. Pronghorn antelope are not that rare. This is in Pinedale, Wyoming. These are the animals that that come from Teton Park and reestablished the migration down into the wintering areas in Pinedale, we put out 72 GPS collars in a day and a half, and that cost over $220,000 to do that. So it's expensive. As many of you may know, some pronghorn operations can have high mortality rates as high as 20%. We were careful and probably not unlucky, and we didn't injure or lose an animal, but that can be the case. And it can also be dangerous for people as well. This is the same helicopter that we flew in. This was 3 weeks later over in Idaho. They were on a wolf capture and they lost the tail rotor. And some of you may know Rick Swisher. He was the pilot, and he was an absolute hero. He put it down on his side of the helicopter, and fortunately nobody died. But as you can see, they didn't walk away. So this is all sort of backdrop to needing better ways, needing to find better tools that are less expensive and safer for wildlife and safer for people. And back in the 90s, we happened on that's a dog's nose. And it's really not hyperbole to say that a dog's nose is the best chemical sensor the world's ever known. It seems like every time I give this talk, the threshold goes down and down. But most recently, it's been demonstrated that dogs can detect constant odor concentrations as low as 1 part per trillion. That was just revised down from 3 parts per trillion. And so not only that is, it's incredibly flexible. We can train a dog on a new odor in an afternoon, and we can take them all sorts of places, and they work for kibble or a ball or whatever. So it really, based on not only its sensitivity, also its specificity. They're very good at discrimination. I'll show you a little bit about that later. And just incredible flexibility. So they really are an amazing tool for all sorts of conservation applications. And I'm going to start with what we've done for the longest, and that's ecological monitoring. And these are the big categories I mentioned earlier that we'll sort of run through. And this is probably the best known application of dogs. It was born mostly out of the advent of fecal DNA, being able to recover DNA from scats. So it became important to find them and find as many of them as we can in as many places as we can. And so, and when I say ecological monitoring, it really is a whole bunch of different things, from counting animals and tracking them through time, but also just finding where they are and what's affecting them in different ways. And this is a little cartoon, but it encapsulates why dogs are so effective. You've got the little cartoon person walking a transect, and we can see on either side, depending on the cover or whatever, and make observations. But number one, we have to directly observe animals. Sometimes we can do it with sign or things like that too. But number two, that the dog is sampling a much, much larger area thanks to olfaction and air moving odor. And we've had dogs, that distance, that perpendicular distance to the transect, we've had dogs go over 600 meters to find a scat off of a transect line. So they can really expand the area we're searching and open doors to finding stuff that we never would have had a chance to find in the past. And I'll just highlight one example of that we've been working on that you guys are actually part of. Sometimes my slide got stuck. Let me see here. There we go. Which is black-footed ferrets. So, ferrets have been reintroduced in a lot of places now. We've worked with 5 different populations, but the point is, and I'm sure you all know this story, they spend most of their time underground. So there are certain windows when they're above ground, and we often try to spotlight or trap them during those periods. So some collaborators in Wyoming came to us and said, hey, could we use dogs to identify occupied burrows and then direct our spotlighting and trapping and camera trapping and all that using data from the dogs. So we did, and we looked at both detection probabilities and compared those to traditional methods. And on an intensive search pattern, basically checking every prairie dog hole, dogs were detecting ferrets at about 96% probability. So, and the way we did that is when there's a known ferret in a burrow, running dogs through there double blind, and they're able to pick it up almost 100% of the time. But what's really cool is that they provide their counts 8 to 16 times faster, and they do it at half the cost. So that's the really valuable part. That's what really makes them a great tool for counting ferrets. And and if you guys indulge me, I realize it's lunchtime, but I'll share just a little bit of data with you guys. This is the sort of greatest hits slide, and this is a lot of times dogs can give us a lot more bang for our buck, or data for our buck, whatever we're sort of after. And so a number of years ago, we sort of took this sample of studies, and I need to be really clear. This is not a random sample. This is a highly biased sample. These are all the studies, all the people who've pretty much exhausted all the other methods. When other methods are working and working well, you don't need dogs, and they don't come to us. So we looked at but when people do choose to use dogs, what gives you the biggest bang for your buck? And so we normalized them all. So a catch per unit effort ratio of 1 is that little red line right there. And we asked, what are the circumstances that lead you above that and give you a better return on the investment? When are dogs the best option? And it's not surprising. It's when they're at very low densities, species at very low densities. When they're cryptic or hidden, turtles are a great example. The eastern box turtle there was 39x. Dogs found them at a rate 39 times what humans could do. And also when they're hard to distinguish. So that's not a huge surprise. But one of the other benefits too is that they open the door to other individuals, not just detecting that a population's there, but they're unbiased in terms of what they will find. And so if you look at turtle studies, for example, that's a geometric tortoise from South Africa. That's actually a dog handled by Vicky Hudson, who works for Cape Nature in South Africa. And those little guys are very, very rare and very sought after, unfortunately. But they have very hard time finding juveniles and the smaller individuals. But the dogs do a great job finding them. So we can also, get better data in terms of age structure and population structure and things like that with dogs. And those different age classes or life stages, they often are in other places, and dogs will find them in places we don't expect them to be. And so we get biased searching, using a model in our heads for where to search, but the dogs don't do that. They'll find them wherever they are. So they can help both see a broader swath of the population, but also remove biases and things like that. We can also use the dogs in other odd places. Odor comes through water just like it does through air. And under the bank there, what you see is that's a fish trap. And on the right panel there, that's Carter Cruz. He works for Turner Endangered Species. And we tested whether dogs could detect fish in streams, which they can do, and whether they can identify them to species. And they can do that. So we had rainbow trout and brook trout in fish traps, and we had empty fish traps, and we ran them up a creek here just next to Bozeman on Ted Turner's place called the Flying D, and they did a fabulous job finding every brook trout that we laid out, and they ignored the rainbows and the empty traps. So they can be useful in strange ways and strange places that we don't really anticipate. I mentioned it earlier at the outset, but they're also incredibly flexible and able to work in different places. That's Lily being carried down a cliff on her way to work on Cross River gorillas. And I believe we had funding from the service for this one too. And as many of you know, Cross River gorillas live just in the highlands between Cameroon and Nigeria, probably only about 250 of them. But what was, and it's not they're a big herbivore, so it's not difficult to find a lot of scats, but what the dogs were able to do, it was track every individual. And so we were really trying to target every single scat that we could get. And another reason I like to mention this one is because not only were we just counting individuals, but we were also looking at diseases, both gorilla and human diseases in those scats. And that's another, whole nother side of things that as laboratory techniques get better and better, both more sensitive, but also less expensive, the value of finding scat just keeps going up and up. So that's Amy Hurt, one of our founders. She was on the Cross River Gorilla Project that was in Cameroon. The otter on the top there, we get heavy metals, flame retardants, pharmaceuticals, and SARS-CoV-2. We can get all of those from from scats now. So we can monitor all of those in aquatic food webs and in wildlife just from non-invasive scat surveys. The middle is a moose pellet, and we were able to work with a fellow called Brett Jesmer in Wyoming, looking at moose. We got provided over 1,000 individuals samples, and looking at both individual identities, but also diet composition using a technique they pioneered called, I don't know, actually I shouldn't say that, I don't know if they pioneered it or not, but using microhistology and also parasites. And we also, we're always watching new technologies like drones and cameras, and I'm going to tell you an example of that a little bit later on in the context of law enforcement. So, but the point being, as new technologies come along, they open different doors for us and help us do different things with dogs. One of those things is the Sao La. Some of you may know that Sao La was only discovered in 1992. Last one observed in the wild was in 2013. But later this year, we will join the Sao La Foundation on a 2-year push to see if there are any Sao La left. Less than 2% of the habitat, Sao La habitat has been systematically surveyed, but they're a perfect species for dogs. Low density, very, very secretive, cryptic in a difficult terrain, all of that stuff. So that's an exciting one that's out there in the future, and maybe someday I can hopefully come back and tell you guys about it, how it all went. I also wanted to mention, as the field has grown, we've broadened the types of targets that we hit, and this is kind of illustrates that. We were approached a number of years ago now to work on this little guy. It's a Fender's blue butterfly, a listed species. But interestingly, the problem wasn't necessarily finding the butterflies; it was finding their host plant. And this is Kincaid's lupin. I confess I'm not a good botanist, but I am told that even really good botanists have a hard time telling Kincaid's lupin from common lupin. And so we were asked, can the dogs discriminate? Can they tell the difference? So rather than, this is a little bit different than a detection problem, just finding something, this is telling the difference between two very similar things. And so we said, well, let's find out. And so we ran trials. We had 5 dogs that ran over 378 different runs at it, and they only made 6 errors. They were right 372 times out of 378. So at that point, the light bulb really went on for us, and we realized, hey, these guys are very, very good at both plants, but also discrimination. And so that work has really, all of that early work was really all the ecological monitoring, and it really led us into a new area, a new field of biosecurity and working on invasive species. So early days it was mostly just weeds, but now it's diversified into all sorts of different species. I'll share with you that some of it has started. It started working on just invasive plants, and as we've learned, the dogs move forward, they can look for multiple things at once. And so this is Utah. He's in actually in the Neil Smith Refuge in Iowa, and there we work on both. Just chase the name out of my head. Chinese bush clover, Lespedeza, and also host plants for monarchs, rare milkweeds and other host plants for butterflies. So it's a cool thing to be able to combine both, searching for different species at the same time. We also work on eradication. That's Dyer's Woad. That's in Utah. That's not a hard. We don't work at when there's that much of the plant around. We do it up on the Montana side of the border, where an infestation was caught earlier, and humans were pulling it, and they just couldn't quite get rid of it. And so they had their series of pull days. They called us in and said, "We think we got it all. Let's use the dogs to see how many we might have missed." And it was over 500 plants. And so that was now 11 years ago. And we've been working on it ever since. And this is what the plants look like now, when we're seeing that when the dogs are finding them, and they're amazing. And some years we will find only less than a dozen, or in a wet year 2 dozen. And we think what's going on is we're mining the seed bank here. We're just because the point is to get to these plants before they flower. And so this is what a lot of them are looking like. And that's Seamus. He's a rescue from here in Bozeman, finding them. So they've been really effective on that front as well. And here's one of the sort of new frontiers. This is one we're working on right now, and I'm going to show you a little bit of video about how that happens. But we are working with Fish, Wildlife and Parks and University of Utah Utah State and Montana State here to monitor disease in bighorn sheep. Specifically, Mycoplasma ovi-pneumoniae or MOV is a disease that is quite common in domestic sheep, but causes acute pneumonia in bighorn sheep. And so the first question we're asking is, can the dogs detect it? The answer is yes. We measure them for sensitivity and specificity, and then combine the two into a measure of accuracy. And their accuracies are between 80 to 90% right now. They're just learning that, discriminating they're doing that with just the pellets, just dung pellets. So far with just domestic sheep. Unfortunately, we're having a die-off here in Montana with bighorn sheep right now, but that does create the opportunity for us to train on positive infected bighorn sheep. So we're moving the dogs into that now. And of course, the challenge in this context is also spatial separation for bighorn and domestic sheep. We're also gonna pilot or explore ways to use guardian dogs to keep bighorns and domestic sheep spatially separated, to not only detect disease but also to prevent it. So that's another one that'll be ongoing for the next couple of years, and hopefully it'll lead to some new tools to help protect sheep. So I'm going to show you a little bit how the disease work happens, and then I'll tell you where we're going with it. But in this picture, that little golden is Stella, and what we do is we put the samples on what we call a scent wheel, and what you can see on the floor there, you can see numbers on the floor. And this is all shot from a remote camera so that we can do a double-blind observation. So you'll see Amanda Ott, she's our trainer, one of our trainers, but the lead training coordinator. And she'll come in. She's going to send Stella around the scent wheel, and she'll stop when she encounters the target odor. She's trained to stop and hold her nose. It's called her indication, and she'll hold her nose on the sample that has MOV infected dung in it. So the other cans, we use distractor odors. We can use dung from an uninfected animal. Sometimes we'll put cat food in there, or tuna, or just an empty swab, or anything, any kind of a distractor odor, so that the dogs don't just learn to alert wherever there's any kind of odor. And those things look like little, if you've ever seen those powdered sugar shakers, that's what they kind of look like, and they're stainless, so we can wash them and do all that sort of stuff with them. So here I'll show you a couple of runs here. She's going to come in. I hope it's not too wiggly. There she is. She's trained to sit, and now Amanda will tell her to go search. And there she goes. And then that's her trained alert. So she stops and looks back at Amanda. Some of the dogs will stand there for longer. This was early on in testing, so she gets rewarded for it. And that's a second trial. It happened to also be in number 2 there. And now you'll see, I believe this next one is a blank. So there's none here. And so she's also trained, if there is none, to come. That's called an all clear. So she comes back. And what that does is it removes the incentive for a dog to cheat, to pretend that there is one there, because they get rewarded either way. So where are we going to go with this? Well, that's one tool, is we can just use it in the lab like that. And we do that double blind stuff so that we're not cueing the dog, so that Amanda doesn't know the answer, and it's read out by and the dog's rewarded by the person outside the room watching remotely on a laptop. So that's one way. Just we use it for testing, and you could bring samples back to the lab and do it that way. But this is an intermediate step. We call those little things snorkels. And this is a step toward moving that process into the field, where we could take the dogs into the field. Say, for example, on a capture operation, a lot of our bighorn get captured from a few populations here in Montana and reseeded around the rest of the state. But screening those animals for disease before they're moved is a priority. So one of the things that we can do, or that we're hoping we'll be able to do, is take scats from those individuals and then move them obviously away from the individuals while they're in a holding pen or whatever, and then screen them. So this is a different dog. This is Benny. He's got a similar indication. He looks at the sample. So he's going to screen these snorkels here. One of them, I believe it's in the bottom center, is the hot one that has the sample in it. And there he goes. And then he gets rewarded. So same thing, Paige, his handler there, she doesn't know the outcome. The person who's observing remotely then tells her, yep, reward him for that. And then off he goes. And all our dogs are toy reward dogs. So, this is when the dopamine's flowing for them and they're playing. And so he gets a nice big reward and gets excited to do the work again. Okay. So another biosecurity application is prevention, prevention of introduction of in this case rodents. Many of you know about the rodent eradication that happened on South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. The British government and private funding and government of South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands spent over 13 million pounds getting rid of rats. And because the glaciers have receded there on South Georgia, they will never have the opportunity to do this again, because it's created refugia where rats and mice would be able to escape trapping and poisoning and all the things that they did to get rid of them. Obviously, these are prolific, really important seabird colonies. And so in order to protect them, the government of South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands came to us and said, we want dogs to screen every ship that comes into our territorial waters. And so we helped them by training Sammy. Obviously, it's a very different application. This is a really difficult scent problem for a dog because, well, it's in the belly of a ship, which is a difficult place to work anyway. That's why we used Sammy. He had to be small. But it's also, they have to alert only to the presence of a rat, not residual odor from urine or feces. So it's a very difficult, we can talk more about it if you guys are interested, but it's a very difficult sort of problem. And I sped this one up because Sammy is a slow and methodical searcher. So, but you'll see him get to work here. This was a training exercise. He has had 3 live finds already on the ship. And this exercise, it was also, there were 6 other humans that worked on it too. They had searched the ship for over an hour, 6 people searching all separately for over an hour. And Sammy came on and he made this find, and you can see he's in odor right now. He's just trying to locate it. He's trying to figure out exactly where it is. But Sammy was on the ship for 7 minutes before they started this video. So it was overall an 8-minute search for Sammy, with humans having put in 360 minutes of search time and still didn't find it. So, and you'll see how we do this. So there's the rat. The rat was put in a container for him, and he found it tucked down all in the back there. And that's in order to keep him sharp and working, he needs to get some rewards on real ships now and then. So that's part of what's going on there in that video. Okay, the last penultimate. There's one very quick one after this, but the last major area is wildlife crime, and this is where I think a lot of our interactions with the service have been from. But I'm really going to focus on 2 different new techniques that we're excited about and working on. And these have grown out of our sort of day-to-day operations. Those 3 dogs are Ruger, Chai, and Earl. They were part of the first conservation law enforcement team into Zambia, canine conservation law enforcement, that is, at Conservation South Luangwa, as Matt mentioned. They are still there. I'll tell you a little more about them in a bit. That program spawned another one in Grimeti, which is near the Western Corridor, abuts the Western Corridor of Serengeti. And both of those projects early on were framed as detection, just detection for dogs. But when we turned up to install the 4 dogs in Serengeti, I met this character. I actually knew him from years before, but I bumped into him. His name is Steve Gulick, and he was working on this fancy camera. And the lower right panel there is the camera portion of it. The rest of it is buried or hidden underground. But the tricky part of this is it has an infrared flash, so it doesn't flash. It doesn't let the poacher or people know that it's acquired their image. But what's really cool about these is that it has artificial intelligence chip in it, and it also has a cell phone or a sat phone, depending on where it's installed in it. So it can do 2 really important things. It'll tell you what's in the image, specifically if it's a human, and if it is a human, it will email or text that image to the anti-poaching warden or the head of law enforcement, whoever we program it to. So that's a really powerful thing. It's a game changer, and that's me on the left there, and that's Grant Burden, who was our collaborator. And Steve had this camera out, and he said to us, "Hey, go see if you can find that camera." And we wandered around, and the whole time we were there, Grant's phone's going ping, 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 because it was taking pictures of me the whole time and texting them to him. So this has obvious value for site security. As many of you know, that the protected areas in Africa, it is illegal to enter on foot. And so by placing these on the boundary, the wardens and game scouts can be alerted for any illegal incursions. So we immediately started training those dogs to track, which is a different discipline than detection, and it can be a little bit risky because sometimes dogs who do detection, if you train them to track, they like tracking so much, and it's really easy for them, and so they'll quit on the detection. But we saw the power in this combination of cameras and dogs, and so we decided to go for it anyway. And while the dogs were early in their training, just doing little short tracks, these two images were acquired. So on the upper left panel, that's someone coming in with supplies for a poaching camp, and the lower right panel, that's two porters coming out with dried meat, dried bush meat. It's air dried in a hidden spot, and then they bring it out and then sell it. You know, a lot of the meat from here goes to Nairobi. But it's been seized. You guys know this. It's been seized, you know, as far as New York City, a lot of it. So and for relatively high prices. So the question was, do we deploy the dogs? They made a decision to go for it. This is Radar and Gisante, his handler. And when we say when they're tracking, they track. This is an illustrative picture of a track. It wasn't the same that night, but they track with a cover team. So our dogs don't do apprehension. When they approach the subject that they're tracking, the handler pulls them back, and it's the cover team who's behind them who goes in and makes the arrest. And that's for a lot of safety reasons. And you know, I mean, my personal opinion is that apprehension dogs aren't that much more effective, but they're a lot more dangerous. So that's part of the reason we avoid them. But anyway, they were deployed that night, and on their very first track, this was a 12-kilometer track. Took them over 5 hours to do it. They did it through the night, and they made an arrest. They caught 6 poachers, over 200 snares, and 986 pounds of bushmeat. And they've just continued to have results like this. It's just an amazing combination. So some of you may know this is local. It's right in your neighborhood. Eric Dinnerstein and Resolve are the folks developing these cameras. This is what the current camera looks like. You can see that's a quarter there. They're really small. They're very easy to hide. And so the lower right panel there, those are 2 handlers from Conservation South Luangwa, Sydney Njovu and Christopher Mwamba, who were just at headquarters with me a couple of weeks ago. And they've come to the States to train with the 2 labs in the photo there, Gene and Jack, to learn tracking. And the cameras have only gotten smaller. They're amazing. They're more flexible now. So that upper right panel is that's the installation instructions. We place them very high up because number one, people don't think to look up high like that. They get a better view, but they can acquire images and recognize people. And these things are amazing now, and you can really hide them. That's actually 3 different cameras in Eric's backyard, and they're really, really hard to spot. So they're also getting very, very, very good at the detection. And now what they'll do is they'll give you a probability of you know how probable it is that it's a human. And the reason a dog guy is telling you about all this stuff is because you know, the cameras are powerful by themselves, but when you send a human out there, you know, even if you're there within minutes, that person within minutes can be relatively far away, or they can just hide if they hear the game scouts coming. But by combining them with a tracking dog, the dogs can lead us right to them. And, you know, 15, 20-minute, half-hour-old tracks, those are very easy for dogs to do. You know, you hear stories of dogs doing tracks days and days old. It does happen, but it's very difficult, and you got to get very lucky. But tracks just a few minutes old are really a much easier enterprise for a dog. So because we know where the camera is, we can put the dog right on the starting point for the track, and they come right after him. So this is Christopher Mwamba. That's his instructor trailing behind him, as he and Jean are tracking. It's forest on the left and a cut cornfield on the right. And what's interesting is the decoy ran right at the edge of the field, but his odor, there was a slight breeze on the right, and you can see his odor settled a few rows into the field there. And that was about a kilometer track now, and they do those. Oh, I'm sorry, it was actually a 1 mile track, and they do those pretty routinely now, and they're up to 2 mile tracks, and that are aged 2 hours now. So you can imagine how excited the dogs will be when they get deployed and get back to Zambia and are doing, fresh new tracks and stuff like that. So as you might imagine, there is huge demand for these cameras, and we're gearing up for that to try to help dog teams add cameras, and for the sites that will have cameras to help them think about adding dog teams to make them both a lot more effective together. Okay, I'm gonna blast through one more new technology, and that's called RASCO. And RASCO is just an acronym for remote air sampling for canine olfaction. And really what we're applying this to is containers, because so much of trafficked wildlife products move in containers. And so really the crux of RASCO is you suck air out of a container. We developed some of these methods using trash cans as miniaturized models for shipping containers. But you suck air out of it, you pass it through a filter, and then you present those filters to the dog. And what that allows us to do is, I guess in air quotes, inspect the inside of a container without having to open it and without having the dog to be physically present. And then we can use a setup just like I showed you for the disease work to screen those. And dogs can screen lots and lots of them all at once. So what's really cool about this process is this technology has been around for a long time, but it's been prohibitively expensive for conservation organizations. So we worked with colleagues at WWF to develop a method that costs less than $100 to set up and less than $1 per sample to deploy. And so we are in the midst right now of refining those methods, and we've got a handful of pilot sites that we're going to go out to hopefully the end of this year, early next year, and actually start piloting this on the ground and see what kind of results we can get. So we're really excited for this as well, because the dogs do a really good job at this. And I think the experimental systems we've been working in are much harder than even real world applications. So we're hopeful that there'll be some significant results from that. I just want to mention a couple other things. One of the things, we only have, we've got about 44 dogs around the world, and a relatively limited reach. But one of the things that we do is we call ourselves, open source. So anything we do, we share with everybody. And this is a process that grew out of that. It's called the Conservation Canine Officers Association, that has grown to over 400 dog and handler teams. Sorry, there are 200 dogs and handlers in the US now, but we work with a network in Africa that has had US Fish and Wildlife Service of over 200. So we're hoping to grow those two together and push it out to have an international chapter and then the US chapter. And why that's relevant is because all these technologies, all these things that we do, we are able to push out and share so that the impacts go far beyond just our organization and our limited number of partners on the ground. Okay, that's all for the law enforcement. I just want to touch very briefly on one new dimension that we're working on, and that's environmental justice. We added this sort of formally in the last year. We've done a lot of projects over the years that could have been called environmental justice, but we're now seeking to really make sure that some of our portfolio is always dedicated to doing that, and it can be law enforcement, it could be biosecurity, any of the disciplines or the applications that I told you about earlier. But we really make sure that it's in places where people are underserved or marginalized, or exposed to a disproportionate amount of environmental degradation. So we're very excited to start a new project this year with the Blackfeet Nation working on food security and food sovereignty. And up on the near Browning, near Glacier National Park, if any of you are familiar with that part of the world. Okay, and then as we sort of coast in here, I just always like to touch on the fact that everybody loves a good dog story. They get lots of attention, and that can be a really powerful thing when you're trying to do outreach and tell people about either whether it's awareness of invasive species or not buying ivory or things like that. And it's really across the board. You know, it's not just the big outlets, but we also get local press, and that can be really useful because you know we can tell the story to the policymakers and decision makers at a national level, and we can reach out to local communities who are affected by and directly involved in whatever conservation process is happening. So we really seek to add that and make sure that everybody takes advantage of that when we're on projects with them, because it's a powerful sort of opportunity. Last thing is I often mention how we're funded, because it does give us a little bit of extra flexibility. We do a lot of fee-for-service work, and we've done it for the service. We do it for states and universities and other NGOs and things like that. But we also have our own, donors, and we chase money ourselves, which is really helpful especially when we do things that are speculative or innovative that haven't been demonstrated before, and kind of open the door to new work. Or it allows us to do work with partners who don't necessarily have very much money. So we can put our effort where it has the most impact, not necessarily where folks have the most money, and that works well. It gives us some flexibility, particularly when we're working with government budgets that can sometimes be constrained in certain ways. We're able to find ways to work around that sort of stuff. So I will end there. Those are my coordinates there. Alice Whitelaw is our intake person. If you have an idea or a project you want to talk about, Alice, she's also a former Fish and Wildlife Service employee. She was involved with the wolf reintroductions in Idaho. Some of you may know her from that. And Lauren Wendt is our lead for law enforcement. So, and if any of you wants, Matt or anybody can share my coordinates with whomever wants them, and hopefully, I've got a few minutes and we can answer a question or two, or give me feedback. I'm interested in feedback too.
Wonderful, thanks, Pete. Always really inspiring to have you and hear from Working Dogs for Conservation. I'm going to, just so folks are aware, so they can directly reach out to you if they want, I'm going to share with the full distro invite the recording of this presentation, so folks can watch it again and connect as needed. I'm going to now stop the video recording.